AWS CodeBuild. What is AWS CodeBuild? Traditionally, to build code, you use a build server, typically like Jenkins, where you have a server and Jenkins is installed on it, and then it reads your code from the repository and builds and produces an artifact. But it takes effort to maintain Jenkins, like patching and provisioning and things like that. But with CodeBuild, you can build your application in the cloud and you don't have to worry about servers or anything like that. So that's where CodeBuild comes into picture, to build your applications in the cloud. So AWS CodeBuild is a fully managed continuous integration server that compiles source code, runs tests, and produces software packages that are ready to deploy. So why would you use CodeBuild? So first of all, it's a fully managed build service. So AWS CodeBuild eliminates the need to set up, patch, update, and manage your own build servers and softwares. So there is no software to install or manage. Then you get continuous scaling. So with AWS CodeBuild, it scales up and down automatically to meet your build volume. So it immediately processes each build you submit and can run separate builds concurrently, which means your builds are not left waiting in a queue. And then it follows the cloud's pay-as-you-go models. So you are charged based on the number of minutes it takes to complete your build. It means that you no longer have to worry about paying for idle build server capacity. And then it's extensible. So you can bring your own build tools and programming runtimes to use with AWS CodeBuild by creating customized build environments in addition to the prepackaged build tools and runtime supported by CodeBuild. So even if you're using Jenkins, there is a plugin available for CodeBuild, so you can delegate the building responsibility of your code to CodeBuild and still use Jenkins. So that option is also available. So, and then it enables continuous integration and delivery, where AWS CodeBuild belongs to a family of AWS code services, as we've discussed, and you can use to create complete automated software release workflows for continuous integration and delivery. And you can also integrate CodeBuild into your existing CI/CD workflow like Jenkins. And for example, as we have discussed, you can have your own worker node in Jenkins, and it's secure. And so with CodeBuild, your build infra artifacts are encrypted with customer specific keys that are managed by AWS KMS, and CodeBuild is integrated with IAM, so you can assign user specific permissions to your build projects. So these are some of the benefits of using CodeBuild, and in the next section we'll see how to use CodeBuild. So what are we going to see in this section? We are going to see how to set up CodeBuild from the console. Then we'll see how to generate artifacts. So if you're using a Java project, how to generate jar file or if you're using some other programming language, how to generate and store your artifacts. Then we'll see the Buildspec.yaml file, which is the core of CodeBuild, and CodeBuild utilizes Buildspec.yaml to do all the steps that it needs. And then we'll see how to monitor your builds and how to review the metrics that are published in CloudWatch for CodeBuild. And we'll see also, and then we are also going to see how to trigger your code builds when somebody checks in to the code in code commit, then how to auto trigger code builds as well. So these are some of the things that we are going to cover in this section. So in the next video, we are going to start with the CodeBuild demo. So now let's look at an example of AWS CodeBuild. So I'm inside my AWS management console. I am logged in as an administrator or using my administrator account. You can go to CodeBuild and it will bring you to this page. So before that, what we need is we need to create a S3 bucket that will store the output of our build. So in Java, usually the output is in form of a jar file or a war file. So if you are using PHP, then it may be a different output, or if you're using Node.js, then you may get a different output that you want to store it somewhere. So for that, we will use S3 bucket. So the output will be stored in an S3 bucket. So for that, I'm going to go to S3, and I already have one bucket created, but I'm going to delete this and we'll just recreate one. So I'm going to delete this bucket. So now over here, we're going to click on create bucket and type in your bucket name. So this will be the bucket that will store the output of your build. And select the region. I'm in North Virginia region, so I'm going to select that and then just click on create. So all you need to do is create a bucket over here. So it's an empty bucket. So now I'm going to go back to CodeBuild. One more thing before that is in code commit, inside our repositories in the Spring Boot Hello, there is a file called Buildspec.yaml. And that's an important file, and this file will be utilized by CodeBuild to run the commands to build our project, because CodeBuild doesn't know what to do with our project. We have to tell CodeBuild what commands to use to build the project. So in this case, in the post build, or you could have put it in the build, we want to run a command called maven package. So this will actually build the project and create the output jar file. And also you want to run some unit tests, so you can do that as well in your CodeBuild build. So we are doing those two things. And the artifact file, so where would you find the output file? So it will be in the target folder, and this is the file name. So that's your artifact section. So you have this different phases like build, post build, and then you have the artifact, and this is their output file. So the CodeBuild will run these commands and then move this output file that will be generated to S3 bucket that we just created. So let's see how to do that. So again, I'm going to go back to the console and go to CodeBuild and create a build project. Project name would be Spring Boot Hello, the same name that we provided in code commit. You can provide a description, and then the source. So our source is in this case AWS code commit repository. So I'm going to select our repository, and there are other different options available like S3, GitHub, Bitbucket, GitHub Enterprise. But keep in mind, there is no private repository available, so you cannot create you cannot use your own private repository. It has to be one of these. What you could do is move your private repository code to S3 whenever you want to do a build, and then select S3 from over here, but you cannot use a private repository as the source. So only these 5 options are available at the moment. So I'm going to select my repository. And do you want a managed image or a custom image to run your code build on? So we're going to use managed image, and then it's we're going to select Ubuntu. We're not going to select Windows to build. And then the runtime would be Java, and depending on your runtime, you can select whichever you want. And then select the runtime version. We're going to select OpenJDK 8 and the service role. So we're going to create a new service role, or let CodeBuild create a new service role for us, and CodeBuild will use this role to get permissions to interact with different resources that CodeBuild needs to interact with. So that's done. And then the build spec file. So use a build spec file. So CodeBuild will look for that buildspec.yaml file in the root of the project. You can insert your own custom commands over here, but we are going to just use the build spec file which we are going to provide to CodeBuild, and not create our custom commands over here. So that's an important thing. And then the artifact. So your project may not have an artifact, but in this case we are going to produce a jar file. So we're going to select S3, and here we're going to select the actual bucket that we had created. So this is the bucket. So the output would be produced in this bucket. And then if you want to have some additional customization, like rename the output jar file and things like that. We're going to leave everything as default. We don't want zip packaging. We'll just go with none, the default packaging, which is jar in our case, and then click on create build project. So this will create a code build project. So now the creation is completed. It will take us to this page, or you could just go back out and come back here and then click on your project name that you had given and then click on start build. So again, if you want to provide some timeout, like how long your build should run and when do you want it to time out, so it's 1 hour by default. I'm going to leave it as default and just click on start build. So you can see your different statuses over here. It's in progress, and then it runs different phases, which we'll discuss later in detail. So right now it's downloading source. So now it's post build, so the build was completed. So you can see the output over here. If you scroll down, there are build logs and all the Maven artifacts being downloaded. So if there are any errors in your build logs, you will be able to see it over here. And it completed the build, and upload artifacts was also successful. I'm going to go back up, and you can see the status over here is succeeded and the phase is completed. So we can view the artifact by clicking on this view artifacts button. And let's go back, and then it will, inside our S3 folder, it will create this, or S3 bucket, it will create the folder and the target, and here is our artifact, the output jar file that was produced by CodeBuild. So in this video, we saw how to set up a CodeBuild project. We had a brief introduction to what is a build spec file and how to utilize that. And then we also saw how to produce the output and how to view the artifact. And we also saw the different sources of your project. It could be a code commit project, or you could upload your code to S3 in a zip format, or you could use your GitHub repo, or you could use enterprise Git or Bitbucket, but you cannot use your custom repository as an input for CodeBuild. So we'll continue with CodeBuild in detail in the further videos, but I wanted to give you a good high-level overview of how CodeBuild works in this video. So in this video, we will look at the build phases, and to understand the build phases, I recommend you play around with one build project, like let's say build your own Java project, or if you are a Python developer, build your own Python project or build your own PHP project. So then you will understand this build process and code build in a lot more detail. So the build phase consists of 10 blocks over here. So when you submit a build to CodeBuild, it goes through all these processes, and that's what we're going to discuss it in this video. So when we first create a build or trigger a build, it goes to the submitted section. It means it acknowledges that you have triggered the build, and it always succeeds in that, and it goes to provisioning phase. So provisioning is basically, it starts creating the resources CodeBuild needs to run your builds, like your compute resources, or if you're asked for some Docker containers to run it on a Docker container, then it does provisioning for that. After that, it downloads the source code on that resource, and then it goes to the installation phase. So if you have provided any installation commands in your build spec, then it will run those, and then it will do some pre-build processes. So again, the commands that you provide in your pre-build step would be run over here, like run unit test cases or provision or install something. So that would go in installation, but Pre-build usually could be unit test or nothing. So the next is the build step. So once pre-build is done, then you go to the build step, or code build goes to the build step, and this is where you actually provide the command to build your project. So like we saw, we gave the command called Maven package for if it's a Java Maven project. So it could be something else for Node.js or PHP or Python or Go. So that's where you build and probably run your unit test as well. So you provide those commands there, and post build, like if you want to do any actions after the build is done, so you provide your commands over there. And then comes the upload artifacts. This is where CodeBuild will upload the artifacts to S3 if you have mentioned the S3 with all the details like the folder inside a bucket and things like that. Next step is finalizing. Finalizing is kind of the opposite of provisioning. So it's deprovisioning, so it will tear down the resources and everything that you had created. And then comes the completed. So once the finalizing is done, it goes to the completed state. So these are the 10 phases of AWS CodeBuild. And then at each stage, you can either succeed or fail, right? Some errors can occur. And so what happens if you fail at one particular phase or succeed at one particular phase? So when you submit, it obviously is going to go to the provisioning state without failing. So there's no failed option. But if the provisioning fails, it directly goes to the completed section because it didn't provision any resources. So it didn't really have to deprovision them. So let's say once provision is succeeded, it goes to download source. And if download source somehow fails, then it goes to the finalizing. So it will deprovision your resources and then go to completed section. Same with install, pre-build, build, any of these, if they fail, like your pre-build, if it fails, or your install fails, download source fails, it goes to finalizing. So basically it will decommission your resources and then go to completed. But if let's say if pre-build succeeds and goes to build, and if build fails, then it will still go to post build and then go to the subsequent phases. So if build fails, it doesn't directly go to the finalizing or completed state. It will first go to post build, then try to upload artifact, finalize, and then go to completed. So that's the subtle difference where some of the phases will directly go to finalize or directly to go to completed, but if it's build or post build or upload artifact fails, it still tries to go to the next step. So these are the 10 phases of code build. And once again, if you want to really understand them, you need to write your own build like we did for Java project. So if you come from a Node.js background, then try to run the project in code build using your Node.js code. And or locally, try to run the code locally, and then and see what things could be happening at each phase. So for in our example, we saw the Java example where the build was Maven package, and then we had uploaded an artifact. So you could have in installation, you could have installed some other software packages you want for your build and things like that. So code build basically just executes your build with the commands you provided, and these are the phases that your build will go through when you use code build. And one thing I would like to mention is you only provide the commands for these 4 phases in your Buildspec.yaml. So you provide commands for install, pre-build, build, and post-build. You do not have to worry about the other phases. It's taken care by code build. But you do have to provide commands for these 4 phases. Not necessarily all the 4, but you need to provide at least the commands for, let's say, the build phase to build your project, or pre-build, or at least one of them to build your project. So that's why the Buildspec.yaml, you only have to worry about these 4 phases in your Buildspec.yaml. In most cases, you can put empty for a few of them. So the only thing I wanted to mention is in Buildspec.yaml, you have to take care of these 4 phases. Now let's look into the details of Buildspec.yaml file. So here is an example Buildspec.yaml file. So it has its own syntax, so you need to follow the syntax. So first we have this environment variable section where you define your environment variables. So they've defined a Java home, and then there's login password, and it's not recommended that you save your password inside a YAML file. So here is where you set your environment variables. So if you are running a Java project, you'll set your Java home here. And then the phases that we had discussed in the phases section. So first one is the install phase. So here then there is this command key where you specify your commands. What do you want to install? So we are installing Maven. So now in our demo project, we didn't have to install Maven because we were using a thing called Maven wrapper, so that the project, let's say it comes pre-installed with Maven. Not exactly, but you can think that it's pre-installed with Maven. So we didn't have to install Maven in our project. But let's say if you don't have a Maven wrapper, then you need to install Maven or your whichever build project. Like if you are using Node, you might have to install npm and things like that. So your build tool, so you install that, and here's the finally will always run regardless of whether the commands above it succeed or fail. So this will always run even if the update or install command fails. So next is the pre-build. So in the pre-build section, we are logging into Docker over here, but whatever you want to apply for your build, it will be in the pre-build, and then again finally, and then the build stage. So build is Maven install or Maven package depending on your project. So that's your build command. So again, these are the phases that we have already seen: the install, pre-build, build, and post-build. So inside in the post-build, over here we are just printing a date over here that the build is completed. So that gives you a little bit more idea about what the Buildspec.yaml does and how it looks like in detail. And then the artifact. So where can I find the artifact? So in Java, artifact is a jar file which is inside the target folder. So that's where when you do this Maven install or Maven package, it generates your artifact, which is actually a jar file. So that's where it is generated. And if you have any secondary artifacts, then you can also mention that. And if you have any caching to be done, so that's the cache key. So then we saw in the console like where we provide steps of what to do with the artifact. In our case, we had uploaded it to S3 in the demo. So this is how a build file looks like. And so this is an example, and then we have a few then we have the syntax of the Buildspec.yaml, where again we have this initially if you want to run the build as a user, you can do that. And here are the main thing is the setting the environment variables, and then the install phase, which commands you want to run, pre-build, which commands you want to run, build, post-build, and then the artifacts section, the artifacts that you want to generate, and where can CodeBuild find your artifacts once they are generated. And then you want to do any caching. So this is the syntax of our Buildspec.yaml file, and then we also saw an example over here of the Buildspec.yaml file. And let me go back to our build. So go to CodeBuild. So in our project, we have the build details, and the Buildspec.yaml was uploaded in our case. So it was already uploaded in our repository. So you can look at that over here. So ours was very simple one where we didn't really, we removed everything else. All we needed was we did Maven test in the build over there, and in the post build we did Maven package. So this package generated the artifact, and we also specified where our artifact target was. So where our artifact was, so it's in the target folder. This is the jar file that gets generated. So this is what our buildspec.yaml look like, and it's uploaded to the root of the project. So CodeBuild looks for buildspec.yaml in the root of your project, and this is how our buildspec.yaml looked like. So that's pretty much what we have for our buildspec.yaml file. Now let's look at some of the monitoring aspects of CodeBuild. So we ran a build, and if you go to CloudWatch and go to logs, and our build was Spring Boot Hello, so it will show up here as in the AWS CodeBuild Spring Boot Hello log group and inside the log stream, and you'll be able to see all the build logs over here as well in your CodeBuild for CloudWatch, in the log section for CloudWatch. So you can do that. And how is it possible? It's possible because remember, during CodeBuild we had to select or create an IAM role, and we let CodeBuild create it as by default, and that role is this one. So if you click on that, it will take us to the role, and inside the role there is a policy, and it was created by CodeBuild itself. We didn't do that. And over here it has the permission to create log group, put logs event, create log stream. So if you remove this permission, then the logs will not be streamed to CloudWatch. And also there are other permissions like git pull, because we wanted to get the code from this repository, and then we wanted to put our artifact to this bucket. So the main point over here was we can stream logs to CloudWatch, and once you have the logs here, you can then use CloudWatch metric filters to create alarms. If you want to create an alarm from like if you see any particular error message and you want to get notified, you can create an alarm over here using the CloudWatch metric filter, which we have seen in the CloudWatch section, like how to create a metric filter. So this is how you can use the CloudWatch logs to view your logs as well. And you can also go to CodeBuild, and if you go here, you'll see the detailed runs of your past runs. So you can go over here and you can view the logs here as well, and in CloudWatch as well. Another important thing in monitoring is matrix. Like, you want to see the matrix. So if you go to CloudWatch and if you go to matrix, and you'll see CodeBuild over here as one of them in the namespace. So in the namespace, when you click matrix by project or by account, you can see both the matrix. So if you see by project, you will see, if you pull up our Spring Boot Hello project name as the dimension, you have different matrix like failed builds. So if you want to see how many failed build we had, we didn't have any failed build. Or like builds, so we had one build right now. So it will show all the matrix over here, like amount of time it took per phase. So if post build duration, how much time it took. So over here it took 7.89 seconds. And for uploading artifacts, how much time did it took. So these are important matrix that you will need when you actually run your builds, and if it's taking time or not, and how many times the builds are failing and things like that. So if you, in the CodeBuild documentation, they have provided different matrix with the description. So you can see we have the build duration, number of builds, failed builds, and different phases, and how much time it took for each phase, how many success builds were there. So we have this per build matrix, and then we have account matrix. So for this account, so you can see the builds, like at what time which build took place, or what time, how many builds were taking place at that particular time. So this is like an account level, and the other one that we saw were like at project level, at code build project level, post build durations and upload artifact durations. So this is at the account level again. So those are the similar metrics, but at the account level. The earlier one were at the code build level. So we have seen that, and now once you have the matrix, you can again create alarms. Like for instance, I want here for the Spring Boot build, failed build. So I'm going to click that. So if I look at this matrix and go here, and you can click here and then create an alarm. So if you want to get a notification if a build failed, you can Spring Boot. So you can create an alarm, and then whenever there's a failed build for more than one failed build, then we get a notification. So you select a SNS topic over here and then create an alarm. So now if you go to alarms, whenever there is a failed build, we will get an alarm at that particular SNS topic. So this is how you set up alarms for your code build. And earlier we saw also you can create a matrix, filter on one of your logs, and then create an alarm over there as well. So these are different ways you can monitor code build, using the matrix or creating alarms, viewing the logs. So it's important to know how to use code build with CloudWatch as well. Now let's look at code build triggers. So let's say, what if you want to trigger your build every morning at 6 a.m. Using our code commit repository or the build that we have created in the demo section, and we want to trigger that build every morning at 6 a.m. So let's look at that. So I'll go to code build, and then we'll go to our build that we have created, and we know what this build does and everything we have already seen a demo. But go to build triggers, and over here create trigger, and let's give our trigger a name, and then frequency. So here is the different frequencies that you can provide, like every hour, every day, every week, or you can provide a custom cron expression if you want to run it at some custom time. So I would do daily and start hour, let's say 6 a.m. and 0 minutes. We'll click on enable this trigger, or we will leave it as on. And then in the advanced section, the source version, basically this will, if we leave it blank, it will build the head of the default branch of our repository. And if you want to specify some other version, you can do that. And the timeout, so we're going to leave the timeout as empty and leave it as default. And if you want to provide any timeout, you can do that. And then I'm going to create a trigger, and I'm going to click on that. So if you look at build triggers, it will trigger this build every morning at 6 a.m. And then you can, again, if you want to modify, you can modify that. So this basically creates a CloudWatch rule. So if you go to your CloudWatch, and then you go to your rules, and you can see here this Spring Boot daily, the rule that is created. And so here are the runtimes when it will run. So on December 13th, it will run at 6 a.m. And if you want to go into details, it will go take you back to the build. So this basically creates a CloudWatch rule. And then you can also create the same rule from here as well. Like you go to do this and create a rule and add a target over here. And we have seen how to create CloudWatch rules in the CloudWatch section. So basically this is how you create your code build triggers to trigger your build at any particular time. And if you want to customize, you can always provide your cron expression to trigger your builds.